Through brutal betrayal, rose an army, fighting for a world where no soul suffers in silence. From the group that brought you Desmond's Law, join us as we shield every paw from cruelty. Welcome to the Desmond's Army podcast, Animal Advocacy Unleashed.
Welcome, everybody, to episode 4 of the Desmond's Army podcast. My name is Matt Caron. I'll be your host, and I'm joined today by Zilla Cannamela, the president of Desmond's Army. Zilla, how you doing? It's good to see you.
I'm great. How are you, Matt?
Doing well. It's a busy time for Desmond's Army. We were busy in the last month of December, and it has just steamrolled through to January. We're starting the new year off with a lot of cases that we are following. So it's been a busy month. No rest for the weary, right?
No rest at all. None. Not for us, not for anyone in the animal community.
We want to let people know about the podcast, so we'll start with that. If you're just tuning in for the first time, this is episode 4. Welcome into the Desmond's Army podcast, all things animal advocacy. So we did episode 1, 2, and 3. Episode 1 was called The Beginning. We talked all about the beginnings of Desmond's Army and Desmond's Law, how it was formed, how it was passed. Then episode 2, you can look back, by the way, on all these episodes on our social media channels if you've missed any one of them. Episode 2 was called The Link with our special guest, Phil Arco of the National Link Coalition, where we talked all about the data-proven link between animal cruelty and domestic violence. That was a great conversation that we had with Phil. Episode 3 was me and our vice president, Linda Pleva, talking about the cases, all the cases that we are following here on a daily basis at Desmond's Army, including cases that we post about and don't post about on our social media channels. And that brings us to today, episode 4. So we're going to continue it with, we're either going to call this episode The Data or The Numbers, because it's always the something. But I'm really excited about today's conversation because in a minute we're going to bring on animal advocate attorney Joyce Glass, who works hand in hand with Desmond's Army. And Zilla, maybe you can tell us just a little bit about Joyce and what we're going to be discussing for today's episode.
Joyce is an amazing animal advocate attorney. She worked under Desmond's Law for 3 or 4 years before she has now moved on to North Carolina. She is making her mark across the United States. That's what she's doing. And helping animals everywhere.
Absolutely. And before we bring Joyce on, we're going to tell you a little bit about her. Just as a reminder to everybody, the Desmond's Army podcast is on all platforms. We are streaming 24/7 on demand. So you can find us on our Facebook page. You can find us on Instagram. You can find us on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcast. If you're just driving, listening in your car, you don't have time to watch a video, our audio is all on Spotify and Apple Podcast. All you have to do is search for Desmond's Army. And one thing we want to do with these episodes is really increase feedback from everyone who's watching them. So we're going to be checking our comments. And what we encourage you to do is if you want us to talk about something, if you have a question, a topic you'd like to see covered, you can email us at a dedicated email. It's called desmondspodcast@gmail.com. That's desmondspodcast@gmail.com. Send us a message there. We look at those and we'll bring it up potentially during the show. So all kinds of things going on. Let's tell you about Joyce Glass. I'll read a little bit about her here. So as Zilla mentioned, Joyce is an attorney advocate who has dedicated the last 14 years of her career to protecting animals from cruelty and neglect. Joyce's pro bono legal practice was founded to provide animal and human welfare. She does this by providing education, drafting and advocating for legislation, and forming partnerships with stakeholders to address animal cruelty cases. In New York, Joyce has contributed to several pieces of legislation to protect the welfare of companion animals, including regulating pet dealers and rescue organizations. Joyce has enjoyed a longstanding collaboration with law enforcement and the district attorney in Suffolk County, New York, to identify, investigate, and prosecute animal cruelty cases. In Connecticut, Joyce has served as an attorney advocate appointed under Desmond's law for civil and criminal cruelty cases, handling both felonies and misdemeanors. Wish there were more felonies, however. More recently, Joyce has expanded her practice to North Carolina, where she contributed to legislation to prohibit the sale of animals in parking lots in Mooresville, which was enacted in March of 2025. Joyce holds a JD from Hofstra Law School, an LLM in animal law from Lewis and Clark School, and an MBA in taxation and finance. Joyce, I might be hitting you up. I need some tax help this year. From Hofstra University Zarb School of Business. So please join me in welcoming attorney advocate Joyce Glass. We will unhide her and bring her into our podcast. Hi, Joyce.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm great. Glad to be here discussing this important topic.
We're thrilled to have you here. So let's jump right in. We have a study that Desmond's Army has conducted. And because it's one thing, okay, take us back to 2016, right? Desmond's law gets passed. It goes into effect. But now we need to figure out, is it working? What are the implications of Desmond's law? And that's really where this study comes in. And you guys left no stone unturned. So Joyce, maybe if you want to start with, why did you decide to conduct this study? How was it done? And why was it so needed?
So, I have a background in legislation and doing this work. And of course, data is always something that you need to look at to see where the weaknesses are, what's working, what's not working. And, when I came to Connecticut, I met Zilla and the members of Desmond's Army pretty quickly. They are an amazing support for the attorney advocates in court. And when I found out that they had been keeping this amazing information in their database. And then I found out that there's no one else, no agency or organization in Connecticut that keeps records of these cases. So, we spoke in 2024 and I said, let's get it analyzed and see what it says, right? We wanted to see what the value of the attorney advocates were. We wanted to see how these cases were being charged. Of course, what we could see regarding the link, because we know that that's present in it's been present in every case that I've ever worked on in 14 years. Between Desmond's Army, myself, and an amazing young woman named Olivia Dorian, we worked for 14 months to put this report together. And I think that it has some really valuable information, not only for Connecticut, but also for other states or municipalities that are contemplating a law like this.
Makes sense. Zilla, you got any questions or do you want me to ask you one?
Go for it.
One thing I wanted to ask you, Z, is, as the president of Desmond's Army, and obviously you work hand in hand with attorney advocates like Joyce, right? So have attorney advocates been effective in the implementation of Desmond's law?
Absolutely. And it depends upon the advocate. I guess what we're seeing, and I think Joyce will touch on this, is there is an inconsistency because there's no program to follow. There's not, any protocol. So we're finding that there needs to be training for the advocates instead of just throwing them in blind. Fortunately, Joyce knew exactly what she was doing, and not all of them do. They get through it, and really turn out to be great advocates. But it's hard at first because, you have to navigate uncharted waters.
Either of you can take this question. I genuinely don't know the answer to it. So how do you find these attorney advocates? Where does the pool for these people come in? Who does provide the training for them?
There's currently no training. There's
No
currently
training,
no
but-
training. And anyone who wants to become an advocate has to contact DOAG and submit their juris number along with, their juris number, their email and address. And then they get put on the list with Department of Agriculture. And from there, the courts hold that list and the court will look at it and see if that attorney is available.
So this is a voluntary thing.
Yes, all
Is it
pro
paid?
bono.
It's all pro bono. Okay. So what would you say to attorneys out there who, maybe care about animals, but aren't doing this.
Well, if you care about animals and you're passionate about it, please, contact Desmond's Army or Joyce, because she's been through it, and we can guide you on how to sign up to become an advocate.
Joyce, anything you would add to that?
Yeah, I mean, we provide support kind of from within. I do agree with Zilla. There should be some sort of training. That is how it works best, because the attorneys that are doing this, they have a passion. They want to help, but this may be their first time in criminal court. They may not be litigators, which you don't need to be. I am not a litigator. And there's a lot to navigate. I did this for a long time, but when I came to Connecticut, it was a whole new, I didn't know the court system here. And Desmond's Army really provided that support for even minor things until, I did the first case, and then, kind of paying it forward. There's me and a couple of other advocates that will help the newer advocates to navigate, and we will go to court with them, or they can come to court and watch us. And that's how we've kind of done it in Connecticut. Although I do think that there should be a formal training program. It's not a law, but there is a program that exists in Onondaga County, and they do have mandatory training. And it works well.
Do we currently have enough attorney advocates to keep up with all of the animal cruelty cases that we're seeing? I see heads shaking. No.
And one of the solutions to that is that if we could get, and this would be down the road after there's some other things that could be addressed under the law. And again, I go back to, you don't have to reinvent the wheel on most things. You need to look and see what's working in other places. And again, I point to Onondaga County. So they, I don't know if they still have it post-pandemic, but they did have it for a long time, probably 7 or 8 years. They had animal court. So the first Wednesday of every month was the animal cruelty cases. It was the same judge. It was very streamlined. It was very structured so that the advocates could take more than one case. And these are pro bono private practice attorneys, so they put it on their calendar and they're not interrupting other things. If you have law enforcement or a veterinarian that needs to come testify, they knew when it was. And it works really well that way. So Zilla and I have spoken before about trying to get that implemented in just a couple of courts in Connecticut as a pilot to see how it goes. Because in that case, if you have a shortage of attorney advocates, you could take more than one case. Right, because it would be heard on the same day.
So getting into this study, why was this ultimately done, this study?
It was done to look at certain data points, which then from those data points, we actually did subset data points because of what we were seeing. So we wanted to see what the value was of attorney advocates in the cruelty cases on misdemeanors and felonies. We looked at how the cases were being charged based upon how they were defined. We defined violent crimes. We also looked at the incidences of domestic violence within those cases. And so what some of the data showed was that there were 533 cases, right? So this was spread over.
And just to be clear, I don't mean to interrupt you, Joyce.
Yep.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but just to be clear, these 533 cases, was this all of the animal cruelty cases or just the one that had an attorney advocate?
No, these were all of the cruelty cases that Desmond's Army had tracked from October 2016 until June of 2025.
Gotcha. Go ahead.
So 85% of the cases were charged as misdemeanors, roughly 12% as felonies. We defined violent crimes as crimes that included death, disfigurement, torture, loss of limb, loss of eyesight, and prolonged abuse. And those were crimes that we felt under the law would rise to the felony level. Only 12% of cases were charged as felonies, but based upon our definition, over 36% of the crimes were violent crimes. 68.8% of violent crimes meeting our definition were charged as misdemeanors. And of the animal cruelty victims, 60% were dogs and cats. And if you recall, Desmond's Law covers only dogs and cats. So 40% of the animal victims are other types of animals, right? And they run the gamut. There's horses, pigs, sheep, goats, hamsters, and fish. So there's 40% of victims that would not be eligible for an attorney advocate to be appointed to their case. We also looked at prior criminal records, if they were charged with additional crimes or if there was a violation of probation. We feel that the numbers that we got are low because it's very hard to track recidivism and prior criminal charges. But 32% of those that were charged with an animal cruelty crime had a prior criminal record, so just about a third. 52% of those charged with a felony animal cruelty had a prior criminal record, and nearly 25% of those charged with neglect had a prior criminal record. We also looked at domestic violence in these cases. So domestic violence, we defined that as involving intimate partners, children, the elderly, and cases that involved the strangulation of another, because that was how some of the cases were charged. So it could be that it was not an intimate partner, a child, or an elderly person. It was just another person. And we feel that these statistics are also very low because, again, we can't track them. 16% of the animal cruelty cases involve domestic violence. 38.9% of the cases charged as a felony involve domestic violence, and nearly 80% of the crimes that met the definition of a violent crime involve domestic violence.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, I just want to go back to these numbers because, the data doesn't lie, and it's shocking to me. So you talked about almost 86% of cases charged as misdemeanors based on this study of 500 something cases. And these are cases that were tracked after the implementation of Desmond's Law, right? So I would imagine that before there was this extra layer of accountability, it was even worse than that.
Yeah, the numbers were shocking. Some of the statistics were shocking even to us. And as noted, they don't tell the whole story, right? Because there's some information that we simply don't have access to. And, when we look specifically at the link, we kind of also looked at the statistics kept by the state of Connecticut for cross-reporting. So for those people who don't know, there is a cross-reporting law in the state of Connecticut, which requires animal control officers, if they have an animal cruelty investigation, they must report that to DOAG so that DOAG can look to see if there are children in the home, if there is something to investigate. And when those state reports are published online, so in 2024, they got 90 reports from animal control, and almost 48% of those cases had prior filings with DCF in the state of Connecticut. If you look at 2023, it was over 58%. So, it's just further evidence of the link in these cases. Very importantly, of course, we looked at what was the indication in cases where attorney advocates were appointed and what would the outcome in those cases. So very importantly, up until this report was done, there was no article or report that gave the results of all attorney advocates that could be appointed. And the meaning of what I mean by that is there are private attorney advocates, and then there are the cases that UConn takes. And so we looked at those all together because that had never been done before. So of the 533 cases, 71 of those had advocates appointed. 89% of those were private pro bono attorneys, and then 82% were through the UConn Law Clinic. Of those cases, 33 of the felony cases had pro bono advocates, and 23% of those were the private attorneys, and 10 were from UConn. So we looked at then what happened in some of those cases. So 9 of the 33 felony cases that had an advocate resulted from increased charges, which meant that it started out as a misdemeanor. And based upon the work of the advocate, a successful argument was made to increase it to felonies. So it's very significant because we know in the state of Connecticut it is extremely difficult to get felony animal cruelty charges, even when the definition is met, right? So that was a pretty important statistic to find. 63% of the felony cases with an attorney advocate assigned resulted in a jail sentence. Also very significant because it is extremely difficult, even with felony animal cruelty charges, to get a jail sentence in the state of Connecticut. Mm-hmm. And then as far as the cases that were nollied, only 2.6% of the cases with an attorney advocate were disposed of with a nollie versus 8.4% without an attorney advocate.
Very interesting. Zilla, I got a question for you if you're up for it, and then I'll switch back to Joyce. And it kind of goes to what Joyce was talking about with how, a lot of these cases are dogs and cats, but almost 40% are other animals that are not covered under Desmond's Law. And we should let people know that on January 27th, if you don't have anything to do, come on down to the Legislative Office building in the state capitol. The Animal Welfare Caucus is going to be holding a public forum where you can express how you feel about the animal laws in Connecticut. And Desmond's Army is going to be holding a news conference of our own at 9 a.m., one of the things we are pushing for strongly is the expansion of Desmond's law to include all companion animals. And so, Z, I want you to tell us why that is so necessary.
Well, I mean, first of all, why are they not afforded the same protection as other animals, as dogs and cats? Horses are companion animals. I have 3 horses outside right now. One of them is not ridden. They're in my yard, play with the dogs, they just don't come in the house. They're companions, goats. People have goats as pets. People have, pigs in their house. Potbelly pigs are wonderful pets. Why are they not afforded the same protection and advocacy as these other animals?
Great
And we
point.
see horses in the equine community. Everybody walks. I can't remember a case, an equine case, that did not receive AR. Whether these horses are starved to death, many of them starved to death. Abuse is abuse. Abuse is abuse. It doesn't matter what the species is. If you're neglecting, if you're starving, if you're beating, what is the difference?
Yeah.
I'd like to know.
One category that we almost never talk about, but it seems to be happening more often. In fact, we just covered a case not too long ago on social media with Desmond's Army. I hear about rooster fighting, cockfighting, rings going on in the state of Connecticut all the time. And these are, animals. So often they'll shoot them up with steroids, and they have these sharp claws, and you just put them like gladiators in battle. And it's quite disturbing when you read about these cases. So even birds, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, with cockfighting, they even put the metal spurs on their feet, so that another bird will kill the other bird. It's intentional. They're fighting to the death, and people are betting on this. I mean, it's a whole realm of illegal activities, that.
And to people who may ask you, well, if you wanted companion animals included and covered under Desmond's law, how come you just didn't do it as part of the original language in the bill originally? What would be the answer to that?
Originally, they were included. All animals were included. And it was the lawmakers that whittled it down to dogs and cats. And I suppose they wanted to see if it worked first. Also, you get the farming industry against it, and which, again, makes no sense. If you're not doing anything wrong, what do you have to worry about? If you're taking care of your animals, what do you have to worry about? It shouldn't affect you.
I think the results of the report, though, now, because a lot of times in legislation, it's very important to get something on the books and then you need to revisit. Right? So something like this report that now shows that 40% of the animal victims are not dogs or cats. The argument to any legislator is this: animal cruelty is a gateway crime to human violence. It's a crime of escalation. So the 40% of defendants that are abusing these other animals, right? They are going to continue unless there's a consequence that acts as a deterrent, right? Having an attorney advocate being on one of those cases, right, will be able to provide the court with the complete story, the complete pattern of behavior of the defendant, so that the best resolution can be reached.
So, Joyce, that actually is a perfect segue into the question that I was going to ask you. What I'd like to know is take us inside the job of an attorney advocate on one of these cases. I mean, since your client, the animal, cannot speak to you, how does an attorney put the narrative together?
You start with typically speaking to the animal control officer. I can say in Connecticut, we have amazing animal control officers. They are hardworking, passionate, caring people. So I usually start with them. I will then get copies of the warrant, any vet records, body cam footage, and go through all of that. And many times it involves multiple conversations, going to see the victim, following up on a necropsy report, making sure that the vet has taken pictures. There was a case, it's included in the report, where a dog lost his leg as a result of the abuse. We made sure that those pictures got before the court, because ultimately the role of the attorney advocate, when we speak in the interest of justice, our job is to tell the story about what happened. We need to establish the pattern of behavior of the defendant, but it's more than just the snapshot of time that led to the charges. It's what happened. There could be a longer pattern of behavior involving other animal victims or humans. In every one of the cases profiled in the report, there are 6 of them. They were actual cases that were done in Connecticut by me and some other advocates. There's an interpersonal connection there, right? So I have had to call prosecutors out of state. That was in the Philip Lynn case, which was very relevant to what happened in that case because he had charges for luring a minor online and assaulting an elderly woman, in addition to felony animal cruelty. It helped to establish the pattern of behavior. So anything that will provide the court with the complete picture of the defendant's behavior is what the role is of the animal advocate. You know, the prosecutors in these cases, they are handling many, many other cases, right, involving loss of life and armed robbery and many other things. And they don't have time to do all of the things that the attorney advocate will do. And basically, it's just getting all of the facts before the court, right? So that when we get up to speak, we have the documentation to back up what we are saying. I have obtained affidavits from witnesses who have then testified. I have obtained affidavits from witnesses where they witnessed abuse on other victims, but it was the same type of abuse. And so the cases, because they're fact specific, can involve any of that. One of the other cases that was profiled that was done by another advocate in Connecticut who's amazing. There were animal cruelty charges that were not originally filed, and he worked really, really hard to prove that they should be. He got appointed to the case. He visited the scene where the animals were killed, and so it could be any of that. That is the role that I will typically play, and that's how the advocates, should be conducting themselves.
And I want to go back to something you just said about videos and pictures and how that is so crucial and important to illustrate the story. I mean, we post a lot of these pictures on our Desmond's Army social media channels, and a lot of them can be quite graphic, and you include a trigger warning because you know that it can really wear on somebody emotionally. But it is so important, I believe, and we believe, to post those images because it really hits home the serious nature of animal cruelty, right? I mean, you look at a starvation case and the rib bones just jutting out. I mean, I remember when I was in the news media, and we can get into this because I know you covered this case in your report about Simo and Lieben, these 2 dogs that were literally beheaded, and having the images to go along with that really hammers this home. So and especially if you're a witness too. I mean, it goes back to the old say something, see something, right? Or whatever the phrase is. So take out your cell phone camera. Everybody can participate in bringing justice for these animals, right?
Yeah. And it can't be understated that the pictures in the video do impact the court. One of the cases that's profiled, which was Axel, who was a Siberian Husky, that dog had 7 healed fractures that were in various stages of healing. So I got up in front of the court and told them that. But in addition to that case, we ensured that post-surgery, there were pictures included, right? Because the consequences to that dog, which were lifelong, were because of the actions of the defendant. That case also had a video where you could hear the abuse. You couldn't see it. And I ensured that got in front of the judge in chambers, and, he did watch it. So all of that matters. And again, it's one of the roles of the attorney advocate is to make sure that all of those facts and that evidence is given the priority that it should be in these cases.
Makes sense.
And I'd like to add that, we've been in court, there's been and spoken with prosecutors and also have spoken with advocates when the pictures never made it. They never made it to the judge. They never made it to the prosecutor without the advocate. It was the advocate that gets those pictures in front of the judge, which is so important, for the visual to be in that file.
And let me ask you this, again, a perfect segue for you, Zilla, into this question that I had. What is the importance of the media in covering animal cruelty cases? Because, the media, especially the corporate mainstream media, they may not be able to show those unblurred pictures to their audience, but they can tell the story. And, the old saying, sunlight is the best disinfectant. I
Yes.
just feel a lot of the times if you have the presence of the media, a camera in the courtroom, that judge, that prosecutor is going to know that there's a lot of people that are watching them, and it adds another level of accountability. Would you agree with that?
Yes, it does. Absolutely. Absolutely. It shows them that people care about this issue. They care about animals and they want to see justice done.
One of the other things that Desmond's Army is going to be pushing for this legislative session, beyond the expansion of Desmond's Army to include all companion animals, is limiting the use of accelerated rehabilitation as a prison diversionary program in cases of animal cruelty that are violent and egregious. Zilla, can you tell us a little bit about why that is so important? Accelerated rehabilitation has almost become the default in animal cruelty cases.
It is the default. And someone is awarded AR, accelerated rehabilitation, within 2 years or 1 year. We've even seen it given for 1 day in a case. Their record's expunged. You have no idea that this is an animal abuser, and it's appropriate for some cases that are less egregious. Somebody ran into a store and left their dog in the car and it was too hot and they came out and somebody was there and they got a ticket for that. Okay. As long as there's no death, if they leave the dog in the hot car for hours, and the dog dies, that should be charged as such. That should be a felony. Because your dog's in the car, it's 85 degrees out and 100 and something in your car.
Right. To go.
So, if you're running into a store and you run back out, it's hot, you had your dog to the vet, and you made another stop and you reported there's a police officer out there, you get a ticket. That's an AR case. You're not apt to repeat it. Accelerated rehabilitation is for people unlikely to reoffend and not such a serious charge.
Well, I think that's good that you make that distinction. I mean, it's not like you're saying throw out AR, throw it out the window. There's a time and a place for it. But I think the point is it's all too often relied upon as a crutch and as the default in these kinds of cases. That's the point to make. And starvation too. Can we talk about that? I mean, if you have a starvation case, to your point, that is prolonged. That has been happening a long time. That's a choice that you make to starve an animal over weeks and months.
The starvation cases are a thorn in my side right now. These poor animals that are starved intentionally. You cannot look at a living being. You cannot walk by an animal day in and day out and not know it needs sustenance to survive. A plant needs water to survive. Humans need food and water to survive. Animals need food and water to survive. If you're not providing that, that's intentional. Period. End of story.
So, Joyce, why isn't it a felony?
The eye roll.
I mean, so here's I want to make one point actually on AR to add something to what Zilla said, if I may, Matt. So one of the issues with AR is that the second prong of that test is typically being ignored, right? So the AR should be granted if the crime is not of a serious nature and the defendant does not have a likelihood to reoffend. If the pattern of behavior has been established, right, and this was a decision that was made day in and day out, to leave a dog tied out, to starve them, failure to provide veterinary care, the defendant has already shown what their pattern of behavior is. There is a likelihood to reoffend. That is not to say that we think every buddy that's charged with animal cruelty should then be denied AR and go to jail. But I do think that if a plea deal is given, AR is denied and a plea deal is given, it has more teeth in it if there is a violation rather than AR, because it's going to wipe the record clean. right? It also sends a message to the larger community that this is what will happen if you act in the same way. As far as why they met more of these cases, particularly starvation, there is a lack of training and education in the state of Connecticut. There is a top-down approach to be easy on animal cruelty. We can say that with certainty. It comes from Hartford. There is no county level government, so there's no chance to be for any kind of diversity in the way that these cases are charged and then prosecuted. We have been told, both myself and Desmond's Army, that they educate on this issue from within. I can tell you with the utmost certainty, doing this day in and day out for 14 years, you cannot educate yourself properly if you are not bringing in outside sources or going to some of the conferences that are offered nationally. Every year there's a training that's run by Animal Legal Defense Fund and the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges. Not one judge from Connecticut goes. There is a conference that through the Association of Prosecuting Attorneys, also with Animal Legal Defense Fund, ACOs, prosecutors, law enforcement, investigators, veterinarians attend from around the country, as far away as Guam, U.S. Virgin Islands. Other than me and Desmond's Army, no one from Connecticut goes. So why are the cases not being charged as felonies? Because the education is not there, right? We do have to fight to get the felony charges made. And then if they are charged, it has to be followed so that it's ensured that once it gets into the court, it's not downgraded, because that has happened many times, right?
Yeah.
It needs to be a priority in the state of Connecticut, and it needs to come from the top. And so far, that has not happened.
I couldn't agree more. Go ahead, Z.
The other thing that happens is if there are charges accompanying an animal cruelty charge, be it a weapons charge, be it domestic violence charge, we're seeing it. I do have to say we are seeing it a bit less, but animal cruelty charges are used as a bargaining chip in court. We'll drop this charge if you plead to this charge. So animal cruelty should not be a bargaining chip, period.
I had this conversation with Joyce offline before we started the podcast, but I'll be honest with you, I really don't mind sharing it on the record. I remember when I was a member of the news media, I had a conversation at the state capitol with a legislator one time about why animal cruelty cases weren't taken more seriously. And he actually, and I won't say the name, but the representative said to me, animals don't vote. Animals don't vote, which I thought was just so revealing. But you know what? Advocates vote. Pet owners vote. And there's a lot of them. To your point, Z, what you just mentioned, I think that I want to talk about the Simo and Lieben case, which you guys cite in your study, because like Z was just talking about, how these cases aren't initially charged with animal cruelty. In that particular case, that person was initially only charged with crimes addressing forgery of documents. Forgery of documents. I guess what happened here, just to get people up to speed, is a guy said he was hunting and he had permission to hunt in the woods when in fact he did not. He had forged documents. Now he allegedly shot these two dogs with a bow, and not only shot them with a bow, but then took a while for them to pass away, recovered their bodies, took them to a taxidermy, tried to get them stuffed. Taxidermy said, "These are pets," refused the animals. So then he beheaded them and skinned them. Wasn't charged.
Well, he took them to a second taxidermist, if I remember correctly. And it was the second taxidermist that saw these dogs had been missing. These dogs got out because a bear went through the fence line.
Right.
And that's how the dogs got out. The owners had let the dogs out early in the morning. It had still been dark. They didn't see that the bear had gone through the fence line, and they went to call the dogs in not too long later, and they were gone.
Well, let me just ask, if there's not an animal advocate attorney in that courtroom, do those animal cruelty charges get added, in your opinion?
No, never. In fact, in this case, so he was originally charged just under deep because he was hunting where he wasn't supposed to, and then he forged the permission. But the thing is that he was charged according to deep, but the fact that the officers that charged him didn't recognize the fact that this was animal cruelty was not only shocking, but then when the advocate worked really hard to get himself appointed. And then after that, he was able to get the charges. But this took months and months and months. And the family, this was the other thing, is the family of these two dogs was very involved. So it's not as if there was no one there, in support of this. It was the advocate plus the multiple members of the family that would attend the court hearings. Other than that, there's no way that he would have been charged with animal cruelty. The other interesting thing is that the person who did this, the defendant, he was a respiratory therapist working in a hospital with patients. Okay. So it just gives you more insight into, how these cases, there's just so much more to them than just the act towards the victim.
Absolutely. Have any other states, Joyce, adopted Desmond's Law or similar versions of it?
So there is Frankie's Law in Maine. That was enacted in 2019. Fortunately, it's really not being used. I do happen to know that because I tried to get an advocate appointed on a case there. I know that in New York, New Jersey, Illinois, Florida, I think in Michigan, there have been proposed bills, none of which have been passed. So again, I'm hoping that this report will give some more guidance on that because now we know what is working and what is not working, right? And then those issues can be addressed in any other municipality or state that chooses to use attorney advocates for these cases.
We should mention, by the way, if people want to read this report in its entirety, you can do that just by going to our Desmond's Army website, desmondsarmy.org. Click on, I believe it's Zilla, correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah, you got to go to news and events. And then underneath that, you can click on reports. And we have two big reports that we did. This is one of them. And then another report we did on the unbelievable rise in animal cruelty cases across Connecticut. So you can read both of those. So Joyce, I guess just, putting a bow on all of this, right? What did we glean from this report? What does the data tell us in terms of the implementation of Desmond's Law since it was passed and how it has worked and how it could improve going forward?
So there is certainly value in appointing attorney advocates on these cases, right? We have a very specific and dedicated direct role as all the attorney advocates I know, we take that role very seriously and stay in our lane. And by that, I mean, we know what we're there for, and that those are the rules that we follow according to the law. And there is value in that in these cases, not only for animals, but for human victims as well. We certainly see that 40% of animal victims are not being given the opportunity to have an advocate in the state of Connecticut, which is extremely important. And I think also what we know from real world experience, because a lot of the articles that have been written about cap laws are all based on theory. They've not been written by anybody actually doing the work, is that you do need to have training of all stakeholders, and there needs to be collaboration. These cases, the best results are through collaboration. You have to be speaking with animal control officers, law enforcement, the veterinarians, the advocacy groups like Desmond's Army. That is the best way that these cases are handled. I have always said it that when the animal cruelty cases are prosecuted properly, it keeps communities safer. So to your point about what the legislator stated about animals don't vote, any legislator has a duty to their constituents. And when these animal crimes are not addressed, they are putting humans in harm's way.
Yeah. I always like to wrap up a podcast or any interview that I'm doing because I don't have all the answers. So I like to say, is there anything anybody wants to talk about that we think is important? Did we miss anything?
Well,
it's good when I don't hear immediate answers to that.
Well, anybody that is interested in this, any attorneys interested in becoming an advocate, again, please reach out to Joyce, Desmond's Army. We can guide you on how to become an advocate for the voiceless.
Absolutely. And we can't do it without attorney advocates like Joyce Glass and many others to implement Desmond's Law, being a critical voice on these court cases. So again, you can check out both of our recent studies on our website, desmondsarmy.org. You can follow us on all of our social media pages, email us about our podcast, at desmondspodcast@gmail.com. Again, this is episode 4, and we're going to be fine-tuning these episodes as we go. And I want to thank everybody for joining us. Anybody got any conclusion, some wrap-up words here? We want to thank everybody.
Yes, thank you, Joyce, so much for everything you've done, for everything you do,
Well, Zilla, I thank you and Desmond's Army, because without the work that you have done from way before this law was passed, as we know, the real work begins after legislation is passed. And since 2016, the reason that Desmond's Law is what it is because of Desmond's Army.
Thank you. We have to hold them accountable to use it.
That is true.
Hold the line, as they say.
And thank you, Matt.
Of course. I'm happy to be a part of this mission. And if you, again, have some time on January 27th, please come to the state capitol, the legislative office building in Hartford, right on Broad Street, and you can make your voice heard. Again, the Animal Welfare Caucus is going to be meeting. Desmond's Army is going to be holding our own news conference advocating for what we stated. It's going to be a big day. It's one thing to sit at home, to complain, to be unhappy, and you have every right to do that. But nothing is going to change unless you use your voice, unless you use your time wisely to come out and speak and advocate. It is crucial, so important in life. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in today, for joining us for the Desmond's Army podcast. I want to thank Zilla Cannamela, the president of Desmond's Army, and Joyce Glass, advocate attorney, for joining us and providing all of their expertise. Thank you both, and we will see you all next time.